Hey everyone, let's give it another 10 seconds before everyone joins in. Perfect. Thank you for joining us for the Fine Tune Your Payment Stack with Network Tokens webinar. As you might know, Visa and MasterCard launched their network tokens. We were recently chatting about this at Very Good Security, and we came to the conclusion that 2022 could definitely be named as the year of network tokens. So why don't we just do a session about what that means for your business? Here we are. My name is Maria, and I'll be moderating today's chat. We'll keep it as casual as possible, but a few quick notes before we get started. So all participants are in listen-only mode. Today's webinar will include both a presentation and a Q&A session. Please enter questions via the chat as you think of them throughout the session, and we'll address as many as possible at the end. Lastly, we'll record the presentation, so you'll receive the email follow-up with the link of the recording. Before we dive in, I would like to give quick intros for Huang and Andrew. They'll be our presenters today. So Huang is the head of payments, products, and solutions at Very Good Security. He works across the payment spectrum, covering acquiring and issuing features from a product standpoint, developing and delivering exceptional payments products to a diverse clientele. Huang is an avid scuba diver and always has great recommendations for delicious food, either in Lisbon, Mexico, or United States. Andrew directs product marketing for VGS payment optimization. He has worked across the merchant side payment environment, specializing in PCI payments facilitation and tailoring payment environments to drive business objectives for merchants and SaaS providers. Andrew loves literature, outdoors, and he speaks French with some of our colleagues. I'm very jealous about that. So before further ado, Andrew, over to you.
C'est parti. I also have just as sophisticated a palette as Huang does, just so everybody knows. Welcome everybody to our webinar today on network tokens. Reviewing some of the RSVP list we got, we noticed that we have people from across the spectrum. Some dedicated payments professionals, some in customer success, relationship managers, and some executives in here. So welcome to everybody. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you an idea of both network tokens as a concept, why you're going to be hearing a lot of it going forward in 2022 and beyond, and then why we're so excited about it here at VGS. So I'll be directing, and Huang is going to be coming in and assisting throughout. So let's get started. And as Maria said, don't be shy about popping your questions into the chat. We'll address them in a rolling manner if it's pertinent to the content on the slides, and then save everything else for the end. So let's get started. So some of you may be hearing network tokens for the first time coming into this webinar. Some of you may have seen network tokens from the card networks. Card networks have been talking about it more or less since 2019 or earlier, and they are in fact out in common use in the marketplace now. But for some interesting reasons, this year we feel it's going to be a much larger theme. And so if nothing else, we hope that you leave this webinar more conversant in the specific value adds of network tokens and exactly where they fit. And one of the things we'll be speaking to shortly is you may be familiar with credential tokens before, your processor tokens, or if you're currently working with VGS right now, the VGS aliasing. So you might be thinking, how exactly do these differ from the tokens that I'm used to working with? So let's define our terms. Merchant-specific tokens administered by the card networks and issuing banks. So network tokens, card networks, Visa and MasterCard, each launching their equivalent version of this in partnership with the issuing banks. So that's one of the first differences between your processor-specific tokens that you may be working with, is these tokens exist across the entire field and across the entire ecosystem of payment processing. Interoperable is the term that Huang wanted to make sure that that I used here. But that's what we mean when we talk about interoperable, because they really are used across the entire ecosystem, as opposed to your processor-specific tokens, which might exist just between the merchant and the PSP before they're detokenized into their FPAN or the primary account number, the PAN, for use with the networks and the issuing banks. So that just immediately takes some of the lift off. And that means there's greater fidelity. That means we're all on the same page. I like to think of it, I might be dating myself, but for those of you who traveled throughout Europe before the euro was in common use, if you were crossing borders, it meant that you were often going to convert into new currencies. So, and then there was a little bit of time, a little bit of cost associated every time you were changing currencies. And so what I think about with network tokens is we have a single currency now, a single token that we can use across the ecosystem. And that's going to save everybody a little work, as we'll get into here. And what that translates into, and I'm sure is the reason why many of you are here, is dollars and cents. What does this mean to me, my business? Is there money I'm leaving on the table? Is this something I want to get ahead of? And if so, what's the difference it's going to make to my bottom line? And as we know with payments, better security means lower costs, and that's something that we'll be getting into as well. So moving on, what exactly are our network tokens? And what exactly are the benefits here? And we'll also be deconstructing the ecosystem that I talked about a few minutes ago. But on the surface, they're very similar to the tokens that you may be familiar with in your PCI environment that we alluded to. But basically an aliased or a tokenized version of sensitive information that's used to increase security in submitting and accepting payments. So the ecosystem is largely the same. Your merchants across on the other side, on the issuing side, the issuing banks, the networks right in the middle. And then the new term that you probably see in here is the token requesters. How exactly are these tokens provisioned? What do you need set up? And that bullet point, the token requesters, is really where VGS comes in. And since this is going to be recorded, and I'm sure our executive team is going to be watching this, the mission of VGS is to secure the world's payments and financial data and then maximize its utility. So it's taking that data that you trust VGS with to store and transmit securely, and then adding value to that, to you, our clients. And this is a perfect example of how we're doing that and how we will continue to do that in 22 and beyond. VGS aliases. So the VGS alias of your secure card information lives on the VGS vault, and you trust us with the storage and transmission of that. Now, what VGS does by aliasing now is we can take that same credential that's already been aliased in our vault that you use, and we can attach a network token value to that as well. So both of those, both the PAN, the primary account number, can exist with the network token in a single VGS alias. And that'll be important later as we talk about who's accepting network tokens, who's going to be ahead of the pack, who's lagging behind from a processor standpoint, who's getting involved in this. But this is where VGS comes in. we are the token requesters who provision these tokens for you, our merchants, store them securely, and then route them to make sure that it yields the highest benefit to you. And one more term I didn't define in the last slide is the PAN, which the primary account number, which I'll be referring to also as FPAN, and then the network token values, which I may refer to as DPAN as well. So NT and DPAN I'll be using interchangeably. So before I get into some of the basics of the diagram, I want to hand it over to Juan quickly and talk about when you speak to interoperability between all the partners here, and when you talk about network tokens as more secure, can you speak into why that is, and why the card networks felt like they had to get involved in credential tokenization when, to an idle observer, it looks like PCI level tokenization requirements seem to have everything covered?
Yeah, so I think the advent of the network tokens really came around a greater data security, or I should say risk security, right? So a lot of it was centered around making sure that whatever payment credential that the merchant stored and passed along through their network and onto the bank issuer, that if that ever got compromised, that there would be some level of security behind that to mitigate any fraudulent transactions, right? And so when we talk about interoperability, what we're really talking about is the ability for a network token that was provisioned to you to be able to take that network token and use it with any of your PSPs. Now, Andrew also highlighted upon the greater fidelity. The rationale behind that is that as any merchant takes let's say a card payment, they can submit that acceptance of card payment and request a network token to be provisioned. So this is where VGS comes in. So VGS is the on behalf of token requester for merchants to both Visa and MasterCard. And the way it works is that VGS helps our merchants to securely collect sensitive information. So in this case, collect sensitive payment data. We take that information, which also includes some PI information on there, and we securely send it to the card networks with a request to provision the network token. Now, what the card networks does is they will in turn pass that request along to the card issuer. The card issuer would approve that request, send that message back to the card network, and the card network will provision a network token, at which point that network token would be let's say a synthetic representation of the actual 16-digit card number. And that will be given to a merchant, and that number is assigned to that specific merchant, right? So a network token can only be used by the merchant in which it's been assigned to. Now, the other thing you're asking about is, well, even before I get there, because the issuer is involved in approving that, that's where the greater fidelity comes through, right? And when a merchant wants to use the network token for payment, this is where the extra layer of security comes through. So the merchant, through VGS, will request, hey, I'm going to submit this network token. In order for me to use this network token, I need to make a request for a one-time use cryptogram. That gets inserted along with the network token as a part of the purchase request and flows through the card network. Now, since the card network was the one that not only provisioned the network token, but also provisioned the cryptogram, then the card network would validate that that cryptogram is the current available cryptogram. Once they validate it, then they send the payment request onto the issuer, the bank issuer, with the flag that, hey, this network token along with the associated one-time use cryptogram has been validated, so it's good. And then the issuer would apply its decisioning logic and then either approve or decline. Now, because there has been that level of handshake, right? This is where the higher level of fidelity. There's a level of trust because the issuer has approved the provisioning. So the likelihood of that getting approved increases dramatically versus if you're sending in a the original 16-digit card number, right? So that's how it flows. Now let's just say that that token or that initial 16-digit card number, the issuer did not enroll themselves in network token. So the network token won't get provisioned, and you can still use the 16-digit card number through VGS. So Andrew had mentioned a VGS alias earlier, and that VGS alias can point to a network token and or a 16-digit card number to pass along as a part of the payment request. Now, in some cases, you might have both, and you may just want to pick and choose which one you prefer.
So with the increased fidelity, is there more of a lift on that initial provisioning of a network token? Because given the players in the space, the partnership with the issuing bank and the networks, one of the benefits is that updates are pushed almost simultaneously to update that network token, correct?
That's correct. So that's the beauty of a network token, which works a little bit differently than a raw or the original 16-digit card number, is that a 16-digit card number can always be replaced due to, let's just say, an expiration date, or maybe the cardholder lost or got their card stolen, right? So then the issuing bank would replace it. And in some cases, the cardholders may cancel their card and call the bank, say, I don't want this card anymore, in which case the card is no longer active. In order for any merchant to be able to identify any of those life cycle events, they typically subscribe to account update, and they submit a file or submit a card to see if there's been any update. Typically what happens, if you're proactive about it, then great, but many merchants react to it. So if there's a decline, then they make that request to see if there's been any updates. The beauty behind a network token is that there's no lift at all. Once that network token has been provisioned, and if there are any changes on the life cycle, then what happens is the issuer updates the card network, and the card network automatically updates the underlying credentials behind the network token. Whereas for the merchant, if you're submitting and asking the card network, has there been an update? They'll say, yes, here's the update, and then you have to update your system with the new credentials. Whereas with the network token, you just maintain that network token. So when it flows all the way through, unlike a PSP token, let's say Stripe, you got a Stripe or a Adyen token. Well, only Adyen can recognize an Adyen token, so they actually have to transform that back into the original 16-digit card number before they submit it to the networks or the gateway.
So with the provisioning and in terms of the initial provisioning of that network token, since we do have two separate networks with Visa and MasterCard, like there are two separate network tokens that or two separate integrations that are taking place here for a token requester or for a firm like VGS, which is provisioning these, correct? And
yes, go ahead.
Some of the merchants in the audience and some of the attendees may be thinking about building that themselves and just trying to get an idea of what that what it takes to become a token requester themselves. And it's certainly possible, but could you give a better idea of what that might entail?
Yeah, I mean, the very first step is you need to have your own CDE environment to be able to host or house payment data, right? That's the very first step. And then the next step is you need to be able to transmit payment data securely to the card networks so that they can receive the provisioning request. That's typically a pretty heavy lift, right? And then you'll have to create this integration, not with one network, but with two networks. And later on, we'll be looking to bringing on board American Express. So with every card network, you have to manage those integrations. So potentially 3, 4 integrations, right? And so that all needs to be managed by you. Whereas with VGS, we kind of do that on your behalf. We not only make that request, but we act as your CDE or environment where we can host your sensitive data on your behalf or your payment data on your behalf. You will get a synthetic representation, which is we call our VGS alias, and that in itself can point to multiple financial instruments associated with that card, whether it's a raw PAN, a network token, or even a PSP token for that matter. So it just makes it a lot easier going through VGS, and the way VGS does it uniquely is that token requester ID, each merchant of ours will get their unique specific, what they call TRID, token requester ID, that's assigned to one merchant. Now, if you're a payment facilitator, there'll be one assigned to you, and there'll be a unique one assigned to each individual sub-merchants that you have. Yeah.
And so I saw the question about how life cycle is handled, and I think we just spoke into that with the initial requesting, the merchant being provided with the token requester IDs, a separate one for the networks.
That's correct. So I wanted to add one more thing, Andrew. So we talked about how the card networks will receive those lifecycle updates, from the card issuers. They're going to update the underlying attributes for those life cycles. There's really nothing that a merchant needs to do. Now, there might be instances where the merchant might want to take some proactive initiation, right? Let's say this customer on file that they have become inactive, right? They might want to make a request for their specific network token to be put on what they call pause or deactivate, right? You can always reactivate or you can deactivate, right? Now, let's just say if the person closes the account and you don't want to no longer hold that network token, you'll get like an update from us saying that, hey, this network token has been closed. So there's no need to hold that network token anymore, right? And you can purge that from your systems. There's various ways the lifecycle events or management can happen.
And for those in the audience who already have some account updater functionality, or some sort of lifecycle product in place, keeping it updated, what's the benefit of making a shift to network token integration as opposed to just an account updater environment?
Well, I think you need both. I mean, one of the benefits is, depending on, the PSP you're using, or depending on, what your outcome you're trying to chase after, sometimes by using a network token, you'll have higher approval rates, right? And in some circumstances, it may be higher risk transactions are better with network tokens, or maybe smaller, larger dollar transactions are better with PANs. Who knows how each PSP behaves or how each issuer behaves, right? But not every card is network token enabled by the issuer, right? Which is why you still need to maintain account updater. The nice thing about the way VGS does account updater is we abstract the whole heavy lifting away for our merchants, and you submit it to a service for VGS. We'll take care of all the backend submission and integration with MasterCard, Visa, and upcoming soon with American Express. And if you enroll your cards into a service, and if there ever is an update, we push it out to you. So you don't need to worry about submitting it yourselves. So we'll take care of all that, and then we'll push you a notification. Hey, by the way, you have a notification, you have updates that you need to pull into your system and update your back end with these new card credentials.
And another question that we're seeing right now. So let's say that like in this graphic where we talk about what many have heard of as payment orchestration, or harnessing multiple PSPs and then setting specific routing logic to determine how transactions are routed to achieve any number of business objectives. If a network token authorization was declined, could you set retry logic for that? Or
you can absolutely do so, right? So you can do it one of multiple ways, right? So you can do a retry by using that network token and choosing a fallback PSP, right? Or you can do the same, vis-a-vis with a 16-digit, what they call it FPAN, which is original 16-digit PAN, and you can do fallback there. Or you could say, let's say you're trying to route a transaction through PSP A with a network token. If that didn't work, you can say, okay, let me try it with a 16-digit PAN, right, to try to achieve the approval that you want.
And one more on the about situations where cardholders are opting out in one of many forms from recurring billing environment, or wanting to remove that credential from a merchant's ecosystem. And Lance, let me make sure I'm faithfully getting your question here. So with network tokens, if a consumer wants to stop a single merchant from using their card, obviously they can go directly to the merchant. Do they have any other recourse with their card, with their issuing bank, or are they kind of forced to square that up with the merchant if they do not want to be charged any longer for a good or service?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, you can always go, it's always easier to go straight to the merchant, but there's been some regulation in place from an issuing standpoint, where if I am a card holder, I call my issuing bank and I want to stop recurring payments, then that issuing bank would block that merchant, right? Place them on a block. So there's two ways you can achieve that outcome, right? But let's say you block that merchant, but then you change your mind, you want to resubscribe. If you don't lift that block, then the issuer is going to continue to block that transaction.
Mm-hmm. So it does shift the lift to the cardholder, in this case, a touch more.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to note is, especially one thing that's beneficial for subscription-based merchants, is that due to the lifecycle management of either a network token or the management of a getting the updates for account updater, it dramatically reduces a lot of friction, right? The need to ask the cardholder for new payment information or new payment method, right? Because you'll continually refresh and ensure that you're submitting the freshest card data, so you don't incur a false positive decline due to outdated card information. And one of the additional added benefits to that is just account updater alone. There's been a study by MasterCard where Netflix was able to reduce attrition by 30%, right? So we're seeing this whole wave of consumer behavior in the pandemic where people are unsubscribing from Peloton subscription, unsubscribing from Netflix because they're no longer in the house, stuck in the house anymore, right? And even for those of us, since it's the new year, the traditional American activity is, hey, I need to lose a holiday weight, I'm going to join a gym, right? Mm-hmm. So, but typically most Americans, probably after 3 months, they get tired of going to the gym, but the gym still keeps charging the subscription. So, if you don't notify the person who has this gym membership, then the gym will continue to keep them as a customer. But if the gym has to tell you, hey, give me new card information, when you haven't been going to the gym for 3 months, are you going to renew? Probably not.
Yeah, backing out and using that intelligence to inform business decisions. Fortunately, I have a pandemic that is excusing me from ever going to the gym ever again right now. So
Yes.
I've got a good thing going on with that. Don't take it from me. So I know this slide is doing a lot of work and encompasses both a lot of acronyms, which I try to use minimally, but really speaks to the VGS integration as a token requester with Visa and MasterCard. And as Huang has noted in a few different places, setting things on autopilot, letting your payments ecosystem become this kind of self-cleaning oven, which is one of the things we're really excited to do at VGS, especially if you're already trusting us with sensitive payments data. This is some of the ways that we lighten the load on you, realize business objectives, help introduce some of those some of the data and information around behaviors as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let me move on here. So in terms of the impact of network tokens here, and I've cited a specific Visa fact sheet from this year, going into some of their studies. We'll also circulate that with some of the other interesting pieces that we find in the space in a follow-up to this webinar here. But this is the math, right? This is what it looks like from Visa's standpoint using their network tokens. So an estimated 2.2% increase in authorizations using the DPAN here, and lower costs. So we all know that within the payment space, fraud and risk and costs are directly related. So when Visa notes a 26% reduction in fraud versus FPAN-based transactions, we know that there's likely going to be some cost items attached to that. And Huang, Visa's made specific announcements around pricing, correct?
That's correct. Visa stated that starting April 2022, anyone who's using a network token for e-com based transactions will see a reduction in processing costs of between 5 to 10 basis points. So, I mean, it may not mean much. I mean, 5 basis points off of a $100 transaction is literally 5 cents, right? But in the whole payments world, that racks up over time. So if we're talking about millions of transactions, that will really add up over time. The other thing I wanted to highlight about the impact of network tokens, which for me, if I was a merchant, would be even more intriguing, is that the increased approval rates. By increasing the approval rate by 2.2% literally translates to, on average, a 2.2 increase in your sales revenue, in your sales throughput. So that is key, right? It's like because you're not using network token, you're seeing potentially a decrease in your approval rate, which have a direct impact on your sales revenue. Now, the other piece is the reduction in fraud, and that's literally has to do with the one-time use cryptogram. So even if someone hacked into your system and got a hold of the network token, or in other words, a DPAN, there's nothing they can do with it. You can't submit a DPAN for an approval. You have to get a cryptogram.
And I want to go back to another point that Lance just noted about NTs just exacerbating a problem if a consumer or a cardholder doesn't want to go directly to the merchant. And Lance, again, let me make sure that I'm being faithful to your question here. But this is points where a cardholder may be under contract, right? Or if a merchant is maybe has delivered goods or services and is charging them, and the potential of a whole new client service issue coming about, and a lot of work created if someone just wants to remove a credential on file with a specific merchant because they're not responsive to the cardholder's request, or they want to have some alternate recourse other than going to the merchant. And I see I mean, in my experience, the card networks are generally very consumer friendly on this, but I concede that there could be additional client service issues for cardholders and servicing that the networks and issuing banks would have to set up to
Yeah,
address.
but that's no different from having a card on file, right? A network token. I mean, if you're signing up for a subscription, every cardholder is signing up to some legal agreement of some service that they signed up for. Now, they always have the right to cancel the service. In addition to that, if they have a card on file, they can always log into their profile and delete that card credential, and it deletes, right? So it's no longer in use. Now, if that doesn't work, let's say the merchant's not cooperating, doesn't even give you that functionality to delete the card on file, then you can always go to your issuer. I mean, there are options for the cardholder. It's just the cardholder needs to know their options. Now,
Yeah, and a merchant operating like that, these cardholders facing that issue with that merchant probably don't exist in a vacuum, right? Like if there's and the networks pay attention to that. If a single merchant is generating a lot of dispute traffic, then that's a great way to get your processing shut off by your PSP.
yeah,
Like
and
merchants are generally responsible for poor customer service or high chargeback and dispute rates.
exactly. And let's just say for a risk score, because that token is associated uniquely, specifically to that particular merchant, it can degrade the confidence and fidelity of that network token that's being sent by that merchant. Right. So that's the other thing to consider, where there are advanced risk scores being provided by the card networks. It will have an impact on over time.
Yeah, exactly. With that token requester ID specific to the merchant, it's like everybody in the ecosystem is being pinged with where this contagion or where poor service levels or high dispute rates are localized.
Absolutely.
So while that may mean a frustrating short-term situation for cardholders, like it can be for any of us who have gone through the dispute process, in the long term, you have a lot of players who have a vested interest in keeping the customer experience, the cardholder experience as good as possible.
Correct.
Let's see. So I see we're at almost 40 minutes. That flew by. So this is almost my outro slide, but what I want to do is couch network token functionality within the broader realm of VGS payment optimization, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a suite of products that is designed to optimize your payments environment. And what that looks like is maximizing acceptance, making sure that you can accept all the payment methods that you choose to, and or more importantly, that your customers choose to submit securely and efficiently. Maximizing approvals, as Huang just mentioned, a 2.2% increase in approvals is almost directly correlated one-to-one with a 2.2% increase in revenue. Asterisk, I'm sure my legal department will be chatting me afterwards for saying that. And lastly, costs. 5 to 10 basis points for selecting a network token to pass on through the transaction process has an instant savings of 5 to 10 basis points with Visa. We're still waiting a little bit to see exactly where MasterCard comes down, but this is a low risk item, and that makes you think low cost. And as merchants attending this webinar, we want you to get a piece of that. You're entitled to that. So that's what we're up to with payment optimization. The theme of this webinar was about fine-tuning your payment stack, and that's exactly what we're up to. That's why you have these two handsome payment geeks in front of you right now talking about network tokens. We get excited about this because we get excited about how this functionality can impact your bottom line and drive a better customer experience and business growth. So a new step in tokenizing card credentials with network tokens. You may have heard it here first, but you certainly won't hear it here last, because it's going to be a big item coming through, with the card brands expected to attach that carrot, the pricing carrot, in the late first quarter or early second quarter of the year. And we think it's just going to keep growing from there. That's why we're embedding it into our card lifecycle products here. It's all built on our secure VGS vault. And with that, let's see, Maria, did we miss any questions here? Huang, I'm happy to lob a few more questions your way. But let's open it up. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juan, Andrew. Like, we'll give it like two more minutes for everyone to submit their questions if they have any. And to remind everyone, we'll send out the recording of the webinar after, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah. If there are questions, I do have a final. Go ahead.
I know I want to know what you're excited about, and I don't know the answer to this, everybody. But some of the other things beside network tokens that, from a payments perspective, you're excited to be working on in 2022. Some of the other news that you're paying attention to right now.
Well, I think, I mean, at least with it as it relates to network tokens, everyone's kind of waiting to see how MasterCard responds to the announcement that Visa made, right? Usually it's, one will follow the other. It's just an issue of timing. And one of the things that people may not realize is, there are different types of network tokens. So the evolution of network tokens will evolve, and things like IoT, like your refrigerator, there's the internet on your refrigerator, you'll be able to buy and make purchases through your refrigerator, which effectively will leverage the network token technology and capabilities. But one thing I'm really excited about is just what we're doing with our customers and what they're asking us for. And what it really is like enabling our customers to take greater control over their payment stack, regardless of where they are on their journey. So if they're at the beginning stage, they don't want any control, we can help them with that. Whereas if they're at a greater maturity level where they want more and more control, we can enable that. But what it really comes down to as you start your journey, in order to be not locked in and be on this journey where you can get more control, it first starts with owning your data. And in order to own your data, you need to have data security posture. And that's what I'm excited about. And as our customers make more requests, they're leading us into more and more new areas that we haven't thought of, and how a merchant can evolve their payment stack and their technology and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, which is really higher approval rates, reduce fraud, and optimize on their costs, and allow for more payment methods.
Right? Maria, any other final questions on here?
Let's see. Yeah, the last one is if you're interested in VGS solution, please request personalized VGS demo. And other than that, I don't see any other questions coming in from the audience. So thank you very much, Andrew, Huang. It was amazing presentation. I'm sure that everyone enjoyed it, and we'll send the follow-up. So everyone has an amazing day, amazing week, and
thank
see you.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Reach out with any questions, follow-ups. We'd be excited to hear from you and hear about what you learned or how we could be working together going forward. Yeah, let's quiz everyone who attended the webinar. Cool. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.